All right. But yeah, like Andy said, tonight we're talking about truth. And I do want to thank Andy for coming up with the title. It sounds a lot better than mine. What was mine? Is truth objective or something like that?
Objective, just 2 words.
Objective truth, yeah. I've never been one for coming up with fancy titles, but that's what we're talking about. And if you, I don't know who painted this, but this is, if you can tell, it's Pontius Pilate and Jesus, and I think probably Pilate's asking him, what is truth? So that's what we're talking about tonight. One of my focuses tonight isn't necessarily, it's not really going to be politics, although, of course, that's something that would be involved in this. I just wanted to talk about the importance of objective truth for the gospel. I'm sure we're familiar with this passage in Romans. The Apostle Paul is talking about the gospel, and he says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on him they have not? How can they call on him they have not believed in? And how can they believe without hearing about him? And how can they hear without a preacher?" And of course, as Christians, or maybe as other people who are looking into Christianity, we know the importance of the gospel for Christianity. It's like, right? Jesus' command to his apostles to make disciples of all nations really doesn't happen without the gospel, does it? So, I don't have to tell y'all how important this is. But in our society today, as y'all are already discussing, we see that we have issues. I don't want to add to Scripture, but I think we could ask another question in addition to what Paul asked, is how can they believe the gospel if they think that we determine truth for ourselves, right? Especially, when we talk about preaching the gospel, the gospel entails, right? It includes the idea that everyone's a sinner and that Jesus died for your sins. And if I go up to someone and say, "Hey, you're a sinner, and Jesus loves you though, so he died for you," and they just tell me, "Well, that's your truth. That's fine." It gets really weird, right? Because they can say, "Well, that's I have no problems with that. You can believe that, but I'm not going to, and it can be true for you." So then you're just like, well, how do I argue with that? So that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight, because we want to talk about this. But I mean, also I think we want to be careful because it might be an issue that the church needs to deal with itself. I was looking online for this, and I saw that in 2020, so there's the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. And it's headed by Dr. George Barna. I bet a lot of us have heard of him. But they did a study in 2020, and I think it involved, I was looking at the website, it involved like 2,000 random adults in the U.S. And they were asking about questions about what they believe about truth, what's the grounding of truth. But they found that out of those people, 58% believed. Now notice though, this has to do with moral truth. But it says 58% believe moral truth is up to the individual to decide. So 58% out of those 2,000 people. So the researchers were surprised to see, and I guess the questionnaire they had asked you where you went to church or if you went to church and things like that. They found that 46% of the adults who listed that they attended an evangelical church believed that moral truth is determined by the individual. So now, I mean, what I'm talking about tonight is truth. Is truth objective or is it relative? That actually is a bit of a different question to ask. Is moral truth relative or objective? And that's a whole nother talk. But at least, but I think, we already know. Me especially, like, I've gotten to the point where I almost don't even want to watch the news anymore. Because I don't really trust anybody, which is sad. Right? Do y'all know, I don't want to watch CNN. I don't even want to watch Fox News. It's like, there's been so many times where I thought, I listened to what they told me about some story, and then I learned there was some other stuff to it that they didn't mention. And I've heard that some people think that we live in what they call a post-truth culture. Post-truth sounds weird, but the idea is that most people determine what's true or false more based on their feelings than the evidence. So whether they hear something that they like and they just accept it as truth, or they have a predetermined notion of what they think is true because they like it, and then they'll go out and look and only find evidence that supports it, and they'll ignore everything else. And when you start to look at this stuff, it really does make sense out of this whole craze on fake news and what's the word, alternate facts. It's like, when I first heard these things, I'm like, what are these people talking about? So, but anyways, a lot of this, what we're kind of going to be doing tonight is looking at the philosophy of it all. And I'm just going to be kind of giving y'all some terms so you'll understand the different ways of coming at it. And then at the end, I'm basically going to give you a really quick thing that you can use to show people that objective truth is undeniable. You can't believe that truth is not objective. I'll show you how it is when we get to the end. So really quickly, well, I mean, not really quickly, it's what the whole talk is about, but we're going to go over these 3 theories of truth I was going to talk to y'all about. And so I teach a course on apologetics at Kingdom Preparatory Academy, where Dr. John DePoe, who has talked here before, he's the headmaster. And we use this book, Douglas Groothuis Christian Apologetics. So if you've ever read that, or if you look at that, you'll notice that the talk I'm using tonight is loosely based off of his, he has a whole chapter on the question of objective truth. So that's what we're kind of following right now. But so I wanted to tell y'all about 3 main theories of truth that you've seen in the history of Western philosophy: correspondence, coherence, and pragmatic theories of truth, okay? And if you see these little, I don't know if y'all can see my laser pointer, I don't think you can, but if you see the little page numbers in parentheses, that's from the Groothuis book, Christian Apologetics. But, and I think I get these definitions from him. But the correspondence theory is actually pretty easy to explain. Most of them are. Correspondence theory of truth is the one that I'm defending tonight. And I think it's easy. Well, they're all easy to remember, but this one's easy to remember because basically the correspondence theory of truth says that truth is that which corresponds with reality. So, when we're talking about truth, we're usually talking about propositions, statements that people make. And, you could take the statement, "It is raining outside." Correspondence theory of truth says that if I say it is raining outside, how do I determine that's true? Well, I look outside, and if it is raining outside, it's true. If it's not raining outside, it's false, right? So when we look at the difference between these 3 theories I was going to show y'all is mainly what the grounding of truth is. So the correspondence theory of truth, the grounding of truth is reality. And that's why we say that this theory of truth entails objective truth. And we've already kind of been saying objective truth here and there. Is everybody familiar with what I'm talking about? I know when I first started in graduate school, you always hear objective, subjective, and those 2 terms always sounded the same to me, really similar, so I got confused a lot. But we're saying that this theory entails objective truth, okay? And what I eventually realized helped me remember what those terms mean is thinking about the statements that people are making and what it's about. So what I talk about is an objective truth. It's true based more on the object of the statement than the subject making the statement. Does that make sense? So if I say this cup is colorful, that's an objective statement because it doesn't matter what your opinion is, it's either true or it's false, right? Mathematics is thought to be a very objective discipline. 1 + 1 = 2 is you're either correct when you say that or you're not. And it doesn't matter what your opinion is, where you grew up, or any of that stuff, right? So that's what objective truth is. If I make a statement, it's true based on the object of the statement. Now, a subjective truth is now we're talking about more like opinions. And that's what I talk about. So like a subjective statement, the truth of the statement is more based on the subject making the statement than the object of the statement. And that might sound weird, but like if I say something like, I think barbecue is the best, right? Of course I'm talking about barbecue, but someone else can say, well, I like Chinese food the best. And both of those statements can be true at the same time, even though they seem contradictory, right? Because only one food can be the best, right? But the thing is, the statements are true based on the person making it, not really the food itself, right? Because if I say barbecue is the best, I'm sharing with you that I like that food the best, basically, right? So that's what we talk about when we say subjective truth. So, when you talk about subjective things, it's like taste in food and any other kind of opinion, more opinion-based. And that's the question tonight: is truth objective or is it subjective? Because some people think that it's all subjective. But you see, the correspondence theory of truth says that truth is objective. It's not eliminating the possibility of subjective truth. It's just saying that most things are objective, or at least, let's say it's at least saying that truth is objective. You can have subjective truth. And what I was going to do is I was going to present these theories to y'all and then show you some objections to the ones I don't think are correct. So then you get the coherence theory of truth. Just a little bit of background on these theories. In the history of Western philosophy, the correspondence theory of truth goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Plato and Aristotle argued for these. And so we're talking about over 2,000 years ago. And but there's been updated, different, I wouldn't say updated, but different theories of truth that have come out. If you look at the history of Western philosophy, so you get the ancient Greeks and then you go into the medieval period. And the medieval period was mainly, in the Western philosophy, it was mainly Christian theologians and philosophers kind of refining the philosophy of the ancient Greeks. But when you get into the modern period, the period starting in the 1500s or so, 1600s and through the 1700s and so forth, you get these philosophers. They call it the modern period in philosophy. Have you ever heard of Rene Descartes? I think, therefore I am. Well, if you know about, especially what Rene Descartes was doing, the modern philosophers, one of their major projects was building philosophical systems that made it so that we could get absolute certainty in our knowledge of the world. Especially Descartes. I think, therefore I am. He thought that was just undeniable and 100% certain. And then he wanted to build his whole system on that. Well, anyways, in the history of it, though, you see modern philosophy get started and then it marches on. But after like 200 or so years, the philosophers started saying, we were promised absolute certain knowledge, but we're still debating all these old questions we've been debating for thousands of years. So that's where you get this period of philosophy, especially in the question of truth, called postmodernism, if y'all have heard of that. And it's called postmodernism because it came right after modernism. We think it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to that project of finding absolute certain knowledge. But some philosophers started saying, we're still debating all this stuff, so we were promised absolute certain knowledge, so now maybe truth isn't even a thing. Maybe it's all just kind of what you make up for yourself. And that's where some of these theories of truth come from. So the coherence theory of truth is one. It says that what makes a statement or belief true is its coherence or consistency with other beliefs. There's actually been different types of this from postmodern philosophers. Some of them will say that, what they do is they kind of just plug in different things for its coherence with X, right? So you see coherence with other beliefs. Some postmodernists argued that what is true is what coheres with what all scholars in a society believe. What is the consensus in a society? That's what truth is. Some of them have made it more down to the individual level. So, and that's kind of what I think of when I hear of coherence theory. It's the idea that if I hear a new proposition, when I'm trying to determine if it's true or not, I look at all my other known truths in my mind, and if it coheres with that, then it can be true. If it doesn't, then it's false. So the grounding of truth in this one, and that's where you get the term coherence theory, is other known truths. And I was just going to make it simple and say we'll go with the idea that it's all the other known truths in my head. But what I like to point out, though, is that now we're walking down the road of subjective truth, though, right? Because what one person has in their mind is going to be different from what another person has in their mind. We're not all guaranteed to have the same beliefs at every moment, right? So what one proposition might cohere with one person's known truths, but the same proposition might not cohere with someone else's. So one person might accept it, one person might reject it. But since the grounding of truth is in our head, then it becomes subjective, right? So at this point, statements like, I don't know, you could come up with any statement. It's raining outside. Seems a little silly to say that one of us might believe it and another one might not. But if truth is subjective, then we're saying that two people can believe that a statement is true, and one person might think it's true, another person might think it's false, and then they could both be correct because truth is subjective. Pragmatic theory of truth. This theory came out. There were some philosophers, I always forget their names. James Dewey, I believe. John Dewey, sorry, I'm messing up their names. Charles Peirce, William James, John Dewey. These are philosophers who have argued for what we call pragmatic theory of truth. These philosophers especially didn't like Descartes' project. They didn't like a lot of things he was doing. They really are postmodern philosophers, but they're very science-minded, and I think that's why they started going down this road of the pragmatic theory. And it's called pragmatic theory because pragmatic theory of truth says that something is true if it is useful or practical. It reminds me, there's some philosophers that were very scientifically minded, and they wanted to get rid of all metaphysics and all the really philosophical stuff, and they had they were called the logical positivists, and they had an idea that something can only be meaningful if you can verify it with your senses. That's what kind of reminds me of this. But basically what they're just saying is if a proposition is useful, then it's true. If it's not, then it's false. So if I told y'all that there's like a block of cheese on the other side of the moon, you might say, well, who cares? What does that have to do? How is that going to affect my life? You'd say that's false. But if I give you some truth that is useful, then I think a lot of times, and it's interesting to me because I don't think they meant for this to be subjective. But one of the things we're going to point out with the pragmatic theory is that it kind of does end up in subjectivity, because what one person might find useful, another person might not. So you can go with the same statement. One person might think it's useful, another person might not. So now we're going down the road of subjectivity again, because one person might think it's true, another person might think it's false, and that doesn't end in a contradiction because truth is subjective. Okay? So what I was going to do is show y'all reasons why I think that coherence theory is problematic. I think coherence theory is actually really weird when we start talking about it. Then I'm going to give you reasons why I think pragmatic theory you can show why it's problematic, but ultimately I'm going to show you that the correspondence theory of truth is undeniable. So whether you like these or not, and let me know if y'all have any questions, by the way, but whether you like my objections to these or not, ultimately we're going to see that it doesn't matter. But I'll show you that here in a second. So a couple issues with coherence theory. The first one is, and because, we've been talking about this, because it goes down the road of subjective truth, because what might cohere with one person's known truths might not cohere with another's. One thing that we emphasize is that, that's just what coherence theory is. So one person might have all these known truths in their head, and another person might have a whole different set of known truths in their head. And coherence theory doesn't have an issue with that. But isn't that weird? So what I point out is that, and this is kind of a silly example, but on my slide I've got one person who thinks that we live in, let's just go with this. One person thinks that we live in a world where, in a galaxy far away, long time ago, there was this intergalactic, struggle between good and evil. But maybe another person thinks that we live in a reality where there's a community of wizards that don't want us to know that they exist, but they live alongside us. These systems might be coherent within themselves, but isn't it weird to say that both of these people are correct? Maybe a less extreme example would be to say that maybe we invite out a bunch of people that think the earth, I don't want to be, telling y'all what I think you believe, but let's say that we invite all these people together to see what everybody thinks the world is like, and half the room thinks the earth is a flat disc, and the other half thinks the earth is a globe suspended in space. Coherence theory says that everybody's correct. If it coheres with all your known truths, then that's just true. So I'm not saying that this makes it obvious that it's wrong. That's just what it does. So, and then another weird thing is that it doesn't even necessarily contradict the correspondence theory. So tonight we're asking ourselves which one of these theories is the best. A weird thing about coherence theory is that both coherence and correspondence theory could be true at the same time. So, because if the correspondence theory of truth corresponds with all your other known truths, then it can be true according to coherence theory. And that just seems weird. My kids at school enjoy this, but he's got his sheet of paper says the correspondence theory coheres with all my known truths. But anyway, so it's weird when you have competing theories that allow for other theories to be correct. So I think that just shows us something's up. Turning to pragmatic theory, I've got 4 things that are fun to think about. We'll be looking at each one of these that's listed on a separate slide. The first one, I think, is really great, that shows that pragmatic theory is, as well as they meant it to be a system of truth, it's almost, can you imagine trying to determine whether everything that you're going to believe or not, you're trying to determine if it's true. You have to determine if it's going to be useful to you at some point. But, imagine you're sitting in a history class and I'm trying to teach y'all that the Twin Towers fell in 2001. So you hear me say that in class, and now you've got to determine, is that proposition going to be useful to me one day? How do you know that? Are you going to have to say, well, I might go to New York and I don't want buildings to fall on me, so maybe that is true. It's almost, if you ask me, it's almost unlivable. You're having to determine every proposition that comes at you whether that's going to be useful or not. And how would you go about doing that? Another thing that Douglas Groothuis points out in the book is that, and I don't know, this is kind of a nuanced point, but an issue that he has with the pragmatic theory of truth is that pragmatic theory says that something is true if it's practical or useful, right? So what he's pointing out is that it would be redundant to say something like, it is beneficial to believe that the Twin Towers fell in 2001, right? Because that's what pragmatic theory says, what that basically means anyways. So what he's pointing out is that if you say the Twin Towers fell in 2001, that's the equivalent of saying it is beneficial to believe the Twin Towers fell in 2001. But does that make sense? He's saying that it's redundant. If pragmatic theory of truth is true, then it's redundant to say that. But doesn't it seem like whenever I say those two statements, it means two different things? One says it's true, the other one says it's useful. But the pragmatic theory says, no, they mean the same thing. So since that seems to be obviously false, we think something's up with pragmatic theory. This third one, I've already mentioned it. The pragmatic theory of truth, a lot of times will end up in subjectivity because, like I said, what one person finds to be useful, another person might not find to be useful. So both of them, one of them is going to reject something, and the other one's going to think it's true. This is one of the reasons why some philosophers have rejected pragmatic theory of truth, because even though it was meant to be something that basically got rid of all nonsense, it ended up being a subjective, a view of truth that ends up in subjectivity that people don't like. One of my favorite critiques of pragmatic theory of truth is that a problem is that false beliefs can be useful, right? Let's see, what is my picture from? Have y'all seen the movie The Village? It's one of those M. Night Shyamalan movies, so if I told you what was happening, it'd probably ruin the whole movie for you, just like how all his movies are, right? You see it the first time, and then it kind of ruins it for all the rest of the time, so you watch it. But in the movie, there's these kids that think that there's monsters in the forest, and their parents told them that because they don't want them wandering off into the forest. But imagine, right? Like, maybe, I'm sure there'd be a lot of times where it would be beneficial to believe that there's monsters in the forest, because that means I'm not going to go in there, I'm not going to get lost, I'm not going to forget my phone and get dehydrated and then be stranded or something like that. So, and when we could talk about all sorts of beliefs that might be false, but could be useful to us. And wouldn't it be weird to say that, yeah, there's monsters in the woods, and that's true. But what I mean is it's useful, but I'm saying it's true. So that's another issue with pragmatic theory, is that even false beliefs can be useful. So those are some of the issues what we see with these other theories. But what I wanted to show y'all, though, is that it's actually really easy. This is one of those times where it's really great, because a lot of things in apologetics take a long time to discuss, which isn't a bad thing, right? Because usually some of the most effective evangelism happens in relationships. But if you ever were on the street and someone came up to you and said there's no such thing as truth, or there's no such thing as objective truth, I did want to tell you, you can correct that in just a couple seconds. So, right, so correspondence theory of truth says that truth is that which corresponds with reality. And an issue is that if you deny the correspondence theory of truth, you're saying that it's true in reality that the correspondence theory of truth is not true. Do you see how that works? So if you're going to be logically consistent, right, so the worst thing that someone can say is that there is no truth. Just by hearing me say all this, and probably some of you already knew the answer to this, but what would you say if I said there's no such thing as truth? Right? It's logically problematic, because if I say there's no such thing as truth, I'm implying that what I'm saying is true. So if what I say is true, what I say is false. It's like me saying that everything I tell you is a lie, if that statement is true, then that statement is false. So so to say that there's no such thing as truth is obviously just a flat out contradiction. But that's the issue, though. With it's a little bit the same happening if you want to deny the correspondence theory, right? So if we're trying to choose, should we choose the correspondence theory? Should we choose the coherence theory? Should we choose the pragmatic theory? I pointed out the issues with the coherence and pragmatic theories, but the thing is, it's just like I said, and you see it up here on our slide. If I say the coherence theory of truth is true, what I mean is, in reality, that's the case. But I can't say that unless I'm assuming that the correspondence theory of truth is true, because that's just kind of how language and logic works. when we speak, we say things about what reality is. I think that's what a lot of natural law theorists say. That's the reason why we know it's wrong to say a lie, because we were given the ability to know and to speak about reality. So you can tell that process is meant to say truth. And what is truth? It's that which corresponds with reality. But anyways, I'm kind of going off on rabbit trails. But yeah, to say that the coherence theory of truth is to assume, to say the coherence theory is true or the pragmatic theory is true is to assume that the correspondence theory is true. If you deny the correspondence theory and you say that it is false, you're making a statement about reality. So it's just, it's an interesting thing about reality, but that's just what it is. The correspondence theory of truth is undeniable. So, but let's bring this back to what we were talking about in the beginning with the gospel, though, right? When I was pointing out what was happening, well, first of all, right? So when I was mentioning the gospel in the beginning. We're saying, how can people believe the gospel if they don't even believe in objective truth? Because if someone says, well, that's true for you but not for me, they really don't have an issue with it. So like, what am I even going to say to them? But that's just what I would recommend, is say, well, ask them, so are you saying that like what I believe is true, but you don't believe that, but that's true for you? If they say that, then just point it out. Say, look, truth is objective. We can't deny that reality is what grounds our truth. It's not our feelings. It's not, it's not what makes you look good to society. It's not your feelings. It's reality. So we could talk a whole nother lecture about moral truth, because there are arguments back and forth for moral relativism and moral objectivism. But just starting out talking about truth, if someone says, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me, you can say, well, there's no such thing as what you're talking about, unless we're talking about taste in food. But what I'm telling you is that you were a sinner and Jesus died for your sins. I'm not saying it's my favorite religion because it makes me feel good. I'm saying that it's true in reality. And that's when you start to, segue into apologetics and things like that, and talk about God's existence and Jesus' resurrection. Of course, what I always say is that hopefully the best case scenario is that you just preach the gospel and they believe it. But apologetics isn't an end in itself. It's just a means to an end. But yeah, I'd just like to point that out. Truth is that which corresponds with reality, and that's what we're claiming. We're claiming God exists and Jesus literally bodily rose from the dead because he died for our sins on the cross. So yeah, someone, thinking about those people in our society that think that moral truth is created by the individual. I will say that ethics is a really tough subject. We look at a lot of ethical questions and the answer is hard to come to. However, a lot of things it's not hard to come to. Like, it is wrong to murder. It is wrong to steal, right? And if you think that people just create their own truth, then it can be okay. Someone can think it's okay. I mean, just thinking about the implications of that. Oh, we all create our own truth. Okay, so I think it's okay to kill people for no reason. Are you seriously saying that I'm right? So, anyways, it's a whole different argument, but it's if they don't believe in truth in the first place, then you've got to start with that. So yeah, so that's why we say that correspondence theory is true. The truth is that which corresponds with reality. So that's what I had. Did y'all have any questions?
So basically, if I say that there's major road work down the road.
Yeah, could you use the mic? That way people it's on.
So what you're saying is, let's say they're doing major road work down the road, and somebody says that's my opinion. Well, if somebody says, well, that's your opinion, well, they're in grave danger, hurting themselves if they go right through and there's a big drop off or something,
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about the correspondence truth then?
Right. Yes. Okay. I think that maybe those are extreme examples that might not happen if someone seriously holds to the coherence theory. But yeah, I mean, if truth ends up being subjective, and what might be true for you might not be true for me, then things like that could happen. I mean, you know, in our society, especially today, that's actually one of the things I start out with in my intro to philosophy class. I say, you know, just on the first day when I'm talking about the syllabus and telling everybody that we all need to behave, I say, I think in our society, a lot of times people think that truth is something that you kind of reach yourself, right? So I might say there's road work down there, and you might say, no, there's not, you know. But if truth is subjective, then all my beliefs about politics and morality, those kind of are a lot more personal, right? It's like you know, it's like my taste in food. You know, I like the stuff I like. But I tell them, you know, so I think maybe a lot of people think that truth is like that. But in this class, we're going to be looking at all these views, and we're going to be saying, giving reasons why we think some of these are wrong, some of these are right. You know, we never come to hard conclusions in class because I don't tell them what to believe. But I say so. But if someone speaks up and they say something against a belief that you like, just don't take it personally, because I think that's one of the reasons why our society is so up in arms all day. I mean, besides just how terrible social media is and how impersonal it is, but we're all up in arms all day because if truth is subjective, then if I tell you you're wrong, it's like me telling you that no barbecue is the best. You're just wrong if you think that Chinese food is the best, you know, and you're like, who are you to tell me that? So you know, if it's subjective, then we all get really offended all day, but it's silly, right? I tell them, you know, let's think about this like we're playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots. We're not boxing each other personally. We're taking our ideas and see which ones are the best. But I'm sorry, you didn't ask about all that. But
I guess another, I still have it on here. A few years ago, there was talk about General George Patton, a great World War II general, was killed in an automobile accident. There's some talk, well, that's not what really happened, but he was in an automobile accident, and that was fact on that one. So that is correspondence on that. No, the details beyond that, well, maybe we can debate it, but he was in a car accident then, yeah. So, okay.
yeah.
So that'd be court. Okay, very good then. Just kind of wanted to, when people are talking about apologetics and the way you believe and what I believe, we can understand the facts. That's what we're talking about. Okay, well, let's agree on the facts on that one then.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what it's about, is that some people are saying, well, you can have your facts and I'll have mine. And that's when we say, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's what we think is there's just one way reality is, and we're all here to try to figure that out. And of course, as Christians, you know, we're saying that in reality, God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. So, yeah.
Okay. Very good.
Do you think that some people will treat some topics in their life with the correspondence theory and other topics in their life with either the coherence or pragmatic theory? You know, I've noticed when it comes to engineering or medicine, they tend to think, okay, let's do correspondence. But when it comes to spiritual things or other topics, then they go to the other ones.
Yeah.
So do you think people switch around?
I do. You know, I think that's why you see that study saying that, because isn't that amazing to see that? I mean, not in a good way. 46% of I mean, you know, who knows what they were saying or who they were reaching. And, you know, I know maybe some of these people go to church on Easter, and so they said they attend church. But it's saying that 46% of people, even in the church, believe that moral truth is determined by the individual. And I think in our society, it's just like, I mean, the answer to your question is yes, morality and religion. Because what I hear all the time is that science is about facts and physical reality and stuff that you can see and touch and hear, and religion is about opinion and just feeling good and living a good life. And people just determine, people feel good in different ways, and that you can choose whatever religion you want because they're all just a way to live a good life, so it doesn't really matter, And they think that religions are mainly just ways to live a good life and to make you feel better before you die. Right? And morality, not all my students are like this, but I have seen a lot of my students, and maybe this will surprise you, maybe it won't, but a lot of my students think that there is no objective right and wrong, but you follow the laws so you don't go to jail. And, those are some of the things we wrestle with in class. But what I always try to tell them, and this might be surprising to some people, is that from what I understand, so I'm not an ethicist, but so I haven't studied it a ton, obviously, apart from a class or two I took on ethics. But from what I understand, most professional ethicists, at least in the United States, the majority of them believe that morality is objective. So the majority of them believe there is one right or wrong answer to every moral question. And so I've always found it really interesting that in our culture, everyone thinks that you just create moral truth. That the questions are so hard to answer, and it's so hard to come to a right decision that we just don't think there's a right answer. But that's what ethicists will tell you. Yeah, it's really tough, but we think there is a right answer.
Would you say sometimes that even if someone has a belief that morality is subjective and just a matter of preference, they'll still use words and they'll live in such a way that they're actually professing that there is objective morality? Like, I've heard of examples that if someone says, I think everyone gets to define right and wrong their way, and then you steal their wallet, they'll say, hey, that's wrong. And they'll start to speak in objective terms, even though they're claiming that those don't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that reminds me. Yeah, because I don't know if it's true, but there's an old joke you hear about a student who, so supposedly, I don't know if this ever happened, but there's a student who writes a thesis on why morality is relative. And, it's well researched, well written, just a beautiful paper. Morality is relative to the individual, but the professor gets it and reads it, looks everything over, and gives them an F. And then he hands them this paper back and he says, that's not fair. You gave me an F on my paper. I've worked so hard on this. It's amazing. Well, how could you do that? He said, well, I don't like the color of the folder you turned it in. It's a joke. So I don't know if it ever happened, but like what he's saying is, well, this is what I think is okay. And if you're saying morality is relative, then it's actually fair that I gave you an F. Because that's just what I think is the correct thing to do. So yeah, and kind of like what you were talking about earlier, people, so sometimes they're inconsistent with saying that morality is relative, but then they act like it's not. But yeah, then other times they're saying that truth is relative, but then in other places they won't. It is a whole nother debate to argue that morality is objective, because then you have to talk about what grounds objective morality, but you can. But so it's a little bit different when we say that moral truth is relative. But that's what I was getting at tonight, though, is that truth itself is objective. So what you're gonna go into that debate with is that whatever determines moral truth, it's gonna be reality. It's not gonna be my feelings. It's not gonna be, what we think is gonna get us ahead in society.
do we have any other questions? I don't want to hog the mic here. Here you go. You have to use the mic so people online, when they listen to the recording. So make sure you speak right there.
Yes, sir. I was instructed to speak right into it, and I think that is the truth. Thank you so much for your presentation tonight. This topic has been difficult for me to follow because my background is the derivative of sine theta is cosine theta. And then working all those problems, and you get a definitive answer that you can prove as you do experiments. And so I hear people now that say, well, that's your truth, it's not my truth. And I think, how can they even think that? And your talk tonight has opened my eyes to that some.
Okay,
although
great.
my background in that other field makes it hard for me to even follow along with this. But
Okay.
thank you for tonight. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. Yeah, and that's when we do talk about why we think that morality is objective. I do use math as an example, because some people say, well, so many people have so many different beliefs about what's right and wrong. There can't be just one right answer.
Oh, not if you're figuring the re-entry of space vehicles. There's one right answer.
Yeah, well, that's what. But you wouldn't give a test on that. And then if 10 different students give 10 different answers, you wouldn't be like, oh, well, there just must be many answers that we determine
Exactly.
for ourselves. And that's what I say. That's why it's silly to say that so many people have these different beliefs in morality. Therefore, it's not objective. It'd be like giving a test, and it's because everyone has a different answer, I'd just say, well, maybe there is no right answer, and you all get 100.
Well, and an observation that so many believe that moral truth is determined by the individual. This individual thinks that those 46% who believe that are not the ones reading their Bible every day.
Yeah. That's, I mean, there's so many verses that you could just pull out, right?
Yes.
But I mean, I don't know. It would be interesting. Yeah, it'd be fun to I don't know if it'd be fun, but it'd be interesting to ask them, say, so are you saying that that was the 10 Commandments are God's opinion? You know? And he's saying, well, this is what I think, but y'all can figure out what you want to do. It's pretty amazing. That from what I understand, they were surprised when they saw that.
It is. That's surprising.
Yeah.
In another generation, they did not think that.
I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this well, but I'm going to try. So when we're dealing with spiritual realities that are much harder to verify based on experience, you can't just look out the window and say, there's a triune God that exists and he sent his, incarnate son. You can't, these are things that you actually have to go to a source or,
Yeah.
Anyways, so, even the words that Jesus speaks, they are spiritual realities. And he uses parallels that, parables is what I'm trying to say. He uses parables to demonstrate, certain spiritual truths in that way, but it is still in the realm of the unseen. Mm-hmm. So, in this idea of the correspondence theory, how do you grapple with the spiritual realities that are harder, especially for, if someone who is not a Christian and we consider that they are blind, to truth? How do we, where do we direct them? Apart from the Bible, the Bible is we agree that's the source that we have to go to for, spiritual truths. But I guess I'm not sure if I'm getting to the point here, but I'm just trying to think through, are there any other ways that we can we can use this theory of the correspondence theory when we're talking about spiritual truth, to someone, who may not want to go to the Bible, I'm sure C.S. Lewis has the answer to this, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get there.
Well, I think, and if I'm sure everyone's talked about this in the tactics class, well, so who's the author of Tactics? Greg Koukl. he just talks about the best thing to do is to listen to somebody first. So I know you weren't asking about that, but just talking about evangelism, usually the best thing to do is to listen to someone, listen to their story, and see what because you don't want to just start on your stuff. You want to listen to them and see what's going on in their life, and then see what you want to touch on. But yeah, if you, it just depends on what they might be having issues with. Because when we talk about Jesus being God and all of us being sinners and needing a Savior, yeah, you have to believe that you have a soul, and that's thought to be immaterial. You have to believe that God exists, and God the Father, the Trinity is thought to be immaterial. So we are talking about a lot of spiritual things that you can't use your senses to verify. But that's what a lot of apologetics has to do with. And obviously, like our testimony, our subjective experiences, and I've personally had some experiences that none of y'all could verify. You just have to take my word for it. Those are great, but also, that's what I love about apologetics. If you check out this book or pick up other books on it, is that there really are what I think good objective evidences for the existence of God. And like what Dr. DePoe is going to present here in a month, is that when you look at the historical evidence, there's good evidence that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And anybody can look at this and see it. So it's not subjective. We point at it as it's objective evidence. But some people have issues with concluding that there's immaterial things, But I do like to point out that not all knowledge is scientific knowledge. But even scientific knowledge, they determine that something exists indirectly, don't they? Right? So like some scientists are theorizing that there's a multiverse beyond the universe that we can see, based on some effects that they see in our universe. Well, guess what? That's what we do when we conclude that God exists. We look at the whole universe, we see that it's contingent, it's not something that explains itself, it needs an explanation for outside itself. Talk about the Big Bang or other things. I know that we get into the debate over the age of the earth, but like even the Big Bang says that all of the whole universe started from a point. Time began, space began. And if the universe didn't exist before that, then the universe can't cause itself to exist, something else does, right? So, but yeah, we talk about intelligent design, God's existence. In philosophy, you call it more rationalistic truths, concluding that something is true apart from using your senses. And that's been accepted throughout the history of Western philosophy. And that's what I tell people. When the SETI program, the scientific program looking for extraterrestrials, right? They're looking for intelligence based off of patterns that they might see in radio waves. So they're trying to detect intelligence based on what they see in the universe. And like I said, sometimes they theorize that there's a multiverse based on what we see here. So even scientists are using what we see in the universe to conclude things that we can't see with our senses. So it's acceptable, and what we just try to do is walk them through the evidence and say, you ever hear someone say, well, there's no evidence for God's existence. Well, what we're saying is the entire universe is the evidence for God's existence. And especially, when we talk about morality, that's another issue, is that if you think anything is objectively true in the moral realm, like if you truly think that it's wrong to murder, and it doesn't, so if you think that's objective and it doesn't matter what someone's opinion is, it's just wrong to kill someone for no reason, then you believe in objective morality. Well, what we say is morality can't be objective unless God exists. Because if we're a product of chance, then we're here for no reason. There's no way that we ought to be. You know what I'm saying? Like when you see a lion eat a gazelle, you don't say, that terrible lion, we should lock that lion up, But if we're just a bunch of animals, then why not kill each other? They do it all the time. But if there's a creator above us who is all good, all knowing, all powerful, and created us for a purpose, then now morality really can be objective. So I'm sorry I went on that whole spiel, but yeah, just some things to be thinking about, because everybody does want to say, well, religion, ethics, that's all a matter of opinion.
Well, that's just your opinion. No. Does anybody, I wanted to say it's 8 o'clock. I just want to honor our time limit. I'm sure you would answer a few more questions. Are you okay with that? Mm-hmm. You're welcome to go get another cup of coffee and get some cookies, or ask some more questions. Does anybody have any more questions at all? Well, while you're ruminating, let me remind you that April 9th is Easter, and the next lecture will be the following Thursday, April 13th, and that is Evidence for the Resurrection, and that will be Dr. John DePoe. So once again, if you're watching this video online after the fact because the live stream didn't work, you're welcome to come to the next lecture on Thursday, April 13th. And again, if you invite some friends to Easter and they have more questions, you can bring them to this lecture. I hope it's a popular one. So, yeah. Dr. DePoe is very interested in talking about that. So, did you have any concluding remarks? Do you want just a basic takeaway for us? It was very interesting. A lot to think about.
No, just that takeaway that it's objective truth is undeniable. If you say it's wrong, then you're saying that your statement isn't objectively true.
Is that an objective takeaway or a subjective takeaway? No. Okay. Well, let's give Dr. Keltz a round of applause. And hope to see you all at the next lecture, and please tell people about it. And if you're watching online, I hope to see you there as well. Bye-bye.